My name is Sombat. I'm 80 years old, and I want to begin with a word about the word healing, because it is one of the most misused words I have encountered in my long life, and getting it right matters enormously before anything else I want to say can land in the right place. Most people, when they think about healing, think about recovering from something, getting back to where they were before the difficulty came, returning to a state before the pain. But this is not what genuine healing is. Genuine healing does not return you to who you were before the wound. It changes you into someone who has genuinely metabolized the wound, who has digested it so completely that it becomes part of your understanding rather than part of your ongoing suffering. That kind of healing does not happen by accident. It does not happen through the passage of time alone, and it does not happen through the suppression or avoidance of what hurts. It happens through a set of practices, some very simple and some deeply demanding, that the Buddhist tradition has been pointing toward for centuries. 10 of them in particular have shaped my own understanding of what healing actually requires. Maybe you are carrying something right now that has not healed in the way you hoped it would. Maybe time has passed and the weight is still there. Maybe you have tried things. Maybe some of them helped partially, and some of them did not help at all. And you are still searching for something that reaches the part of the wound that remains untouched. If any of that is true, stay with me, because what I am going to share is not a system of spiritual techniques designed to make you feel better temporarily. It is a map of how genuine healing actually moves through a human being. I was born in northern Thailand and entered monastic life as a young man, carrying wounds I did not yet have language for. I had experienced the ordinary and extraordinary losses that life brings. I had absorbed the particular kind of damage that comes from feeling chronically unsafe, from learning too early that certain things about you are not acceptable, from developing the survival strategies of someone who has had to manage difficulty largely alone. And I brought all of that into practice with the genuine hope that spiritual life would heal it. That hope was not wrong, but my understanding of how the healing would happen was almost entirely mistaken. I thought practice would make me rise above the wounds. I thought enough meditation would lift me past them. I thought sufficient spiritual achievement would render them irrelevant. What actually happened was something I did not expect, and something that, in retrospect, is the only thing that could have worked. The practice did not lift me above the wounds. It helped me go into them with enough honesty and enough gentleness that they could finally begin to move. The first rule toward genuine healing is this: you must be willing to feel what you have been not feeling. This sounds simple. It is among the most demanding things a human being can do. Because the things we have not been feeling are usually the things we learned at some point were not safe to feel. The grief that had no space in a family that required forward movement. The fear that had no place in a life that required the appearance of strength. The anger that had no permission in a situation that required compliance. These unfelt things do not disappear when they are not felt. They accumulate. They take up residence in the body. They shape the nervous system. They become the invisible filter through which all subsequent experience is processed. And healing requires giving them, finally, the permission to be felt that they were denied the first time. The second rule is that healing is not linear. This is something I wish someone had told me clearly when I began. I assumed that if I was genuinely healing, the trajectory would be consistently upward, that each week would feel better than the last, that a day of genuine difficulty meant I had gone backward, that the return of old pain meant the healing had not worked. None of that was true. Healing moves in spirals. It returns to the same places more than once, but each time with a little more capacity to be with what is there. The willingness to trust that spiral, to not abandon the process the moment it does not look like a straight line, is one of the most essential practices of the whole path. The third rule is that the body must be included. This is where most intellectual approaches to healing fail. The body is not a vehicle for the mind. It is not simply the thing the mind travels around in. The body holds memory in ways the thinking mind cannot access. Trauma, loss, chronic stress, the physical residue of emotions that were felt but not fully expressed. All of these are stored in the body as pattern, as tension, as the particular way your nervous system has learned to organize itself around what happened. Genuine healing includes returning to the body, feeling what is there, moving through what has been held, not as a technique, but as a genuine return to the full experience of being embodied. You know what surprised me most? How much of what I carried in my mind was actually stored in my body. How much of my anxiety lived in my shoulders. How much of my grief was held in my chest. How much of my fear expressed itself in the particular shallow quality of my breath. Working with those physical holdings, genuinely and patiently, released things that years of conceptual understanding had never reached. The fourth rule is that genuine healing requires the practice of self-compassion, not self-indulgence, not the avoidance of accountability, but the recognition that the wounds you carry developed in the presence of real circumstances, and that you responded to those circumstances as best you could with the resources you had at the time. The harshness that most people direct toward their own wounds, the shame they carry about having been wounded at all, is one of the primary things that keeps wounds from healing. A wound that is shamed goes underground. It does not resolve. It waits, and the waiting makes it worse. Self-compassion gives the wound permission to surface, and what surfaces can finally be met. The fifth rule is that healing often requires witnesses. This is perhaps the most countercultural thing in this entire teaching, because the dominant narrative about inner strength is that genuine healing should be something you can accomplish alone. But there is something about being genuinely seen, about having your experience witnessed by another person who can be fully present to it without flinching or fixing or minimizing, that allows things to move that cannot move in isolation. The willingness to let someone else see what you are carrying is not weakness. It is often the thing that makes the difference between a wound that remains frozen and one that can finally thaw. The sixth rule is that forgiveness is for you, not for them. This is perhaps the most misunderstood teaching in the entire tradition of healing. Forgiveness does not mean that what happened was acceptable. It does not mean that the person who hurt you deserves anything from you. It does not even necessarily mean a change in the relationship. What it means is that you are choosing to stop carrying the weight of the wound on behalf of the person who caused it. You are choosing to release yourself from the ongoing cost of holding them responsible in a way that requires your continued suffering. That release, when it comes genuinely and not as performed spirituality, is one of the most powerful acts of healing available. The seventh rule is that healing is supported by simplicity. A nervous system that is constantly saturated cannot heal as effectively as one that has space. The constant busyness that characterizes most modern lives is not neutral with respect to healing. It is actively resistant to it. Because healing requires a quality of inner space and inner slowness that busyness systematically eliminates. Creating genuine pockets of simplicity, of genuine quiet, of reduced demand is not laziness. It is creating the conditions in which the natural healing intelligence of the body and mind can actually operate. The eighth rule is that gratitude, practiced genuinely, accelerates healing. Not as a spiritual bypass, not as a way of talking yourself out of feeling what you actually feel, but as the practice of genuinely noticing, alongside what is difficult, what is also present and intact and available. The mind that can hold both what is wounded and what is whole simultaneously is a mind that has more resources for healing than the mind that can see only the wound. This balance, practiced honestly rather than performed positively, changes the internal environment in ways that are genuinely healing. The ninth rule is that healing is served by honest movement, by which I mean the willingness to take genuine action in your life from the place of healing rather than from the place of wound. To make choices that express what you value rather than what your fear requires. To speak from what is true rather than from what is strategically safe. To move toward what genuinely matters rather than to stay defended from what genuinely hurts. This kind of movement, however small and however imperfect, is itself a healing act, because it generates evidence, genuine evidence from your own life, that you are capable of more than what the wound suggests. The 10th rule is the simplest and the most foundational of all. Healing happens in the present moment, or it does not happen at all. Not in the revisiting of the past, though that has its necessary place. Not in the construction of a better future, though intention matters. But in the quality of presence you bring to this moment, to this breath, to this day, to the actual texture of what is here right now. The wound lives in memory. The healing happens now. And every time you bring genuine, honest presence to what is here, without fleeing into the past or the future, without adding the extra suffering of resistance or shame, you are doing the thing that healing requires. You are being here, fully, honestly, in whatever state you are in. And that, repeated with patience and genuine care over time, is how healing actually works. At 80 years old, I carry far less than I once carried, not because I became someone who never experienced difficulty, but because I found slowly and imperfectly a way to move through difficulty rather than to hold it indefinitely. The wounds I have healed most completely are the ones I was most willing to genuinely meet. The ones I was least willing to meet are the ones that required the most time. That is not a criticism, it is simply what I have observed to be true, and I share it with you because it is among the most useful things I know. Tell me in the comments what you are carrying that has not yet healed in the way you hoped. Not to expose yourself, but to name it honestly, because what is named honestly is closer to being met, and what is genuinely met can finally begin to heal. And if this message gave you something real to work with, stay close to this space, because the path of genuine healing is long, and it is much easier to walk with somewhere to return to.